Hello, everybody. I am Kate Brodock. I'm CEO of Women 2.0. So glad to have you here with us today for a number of reasons. Number one, we're getting into December. We're closing out our 2021 programming. For many of you, I'm so thankful you've been here a couple times with us on some of these sessions. And we're also really looking forward to 2022. The other reason I'm so excited is because this topic and our speaker/author is one of my favorites. We've had her a couple of times as she's been doing work through Imposter Breakthrough, focused on Imposter Syndrome, which has now transformed into both a book and a whole entire program around composure. And the art of executive presence, which is what we are going to dive into today. Our fantastic speaker is Kate Purmal. She is the main author of Composure. She also works with two other fantastic colleagues, Lee Epting and Joshua Isaac, and they together have been doing this type of programming for executives around the world, right, Kate?
Yes, around the world, globally.
Yeah, around the world for a number of years, and have really developed it into a great program. So excited to dive into their book. Couple of line items before we start. Please feel free to ask questions as you go along, as we're going along. You can either put them in chat or you can put them in the ask a question section. And I can verbalize them as well. So that's how we'll handle. We will also have a time at the end where we can handle some question and answer as well. If you want to check out the book, there should be a nice little button down at the bottom of your screen in green. That'll take you straight to the website. So go ahead and do that. And without further ado, let's dive in. We're going to sort of start with an obvious one. And Kate, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Thank you. And Kate, I'm so delighted to be here. It's always nice to talk to another Kate. We confuse ourselves with each other when we're talking. So this is fun. I started my career as a software engineer way back I graduated from college in the mid 80s. And so I spent most of my career in the product and technology and even the semiconductor industry. And so I was always the only one in the room. And so I had that experience of being the only woman throughout most of my career. I, during that time, married a Black man, and I had two biracial children. And really, it wasn't until just a year ago, when I was in the throngs of writing my book, that I started to understand the dynamic around race and marginalization and the intersectionality. I sort of assumed that my experience as a woman in this very male-dominated field was, sort of gave me a real understanding of what it's like to move through the world as an other. But I learned, and I'll read this to you from my daughter, that wasn't the case. So this is the social media post that she posted on the day of my book launch. And pardon me if I cry, it's very emotional for me. She says, "Today my heart beams with pride for my mother, Kate Purmal, who officially launched her book, Composure, The Art of Executive Presence. Composure draws on over 2 decades of experience and research into the challenges that marginalized identity groups face in the workplace and how they can harness their power and influence to grow their careers in a way that is both sustainable and true to who they are. What I am most proud of my mother for, though, is not the decades of work and research behind the book. What I'm most proud of is the work she did on a single night when her pen was down, her laptop was closed, and she was sitting with me under the stars in beautiful Santa Barbara. That night, I recounted a recent experience I had with a white woman, someone close to our circle of family and friends, who said that I was intimidating and threatening. We had a quick back and forth about whether this should be taken as a compliment or with any weight at all before I finally turned to my white mother and asked her a question that would forever change our relationship. Mom, do you think she would have said this about me if I was not Black? She started to respond, honey, of course, no. And then she stopped herself. She saw in my tear-filled eyes something that would forever impact the trajectory of her writing, her work, and her impact on the world. She saw me yearning for her to see me, not as a mother, but as the world did. And in that moment, she learned a lesson that no one could teach her but her Black daughter, that no matter how much she willed the world to see and value me for what I did and thought and wrote and said, the world would always see me as Black. They say that good art is born out of an ill-designed world. This is true of Composure, whose heart and soul is the beauty it creates space for in the context of the broken world it was written in. Instead of writing about the world as it should be, rid of every ism and full of fairness, my mom confronts and writes for the world as it is, for white women like her, Black women like me, and everyone in between. To my mother, Kate Purmal, thank you for seeing me and writing a book that sees me too in big and small ways. It is no coincidence that you celebrate your book launch under the stars in Santa Barbara just 1 year later.
Well, I don't know how we can really get into logistical stuff after that, Kate.
You know.
That was really, thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was really meaningful. And from knowing the work as well as I do through a couple of sessions with you, I can absolutely see how that is reflected, and also your work is reflected back in that scenario and that wisdom. That was really real. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to the book. Okay, we are going to get logistical. I thought it would help first to start out the audience, and you do these definitions in the book. Can we start out with a couple definitions?
Yes.
Imposter syndrome, definitions, your own definition of executive presence as you see it, and then really how that came together to be this idea of composure.
Absolutely. So imposter syndrome is actually something that was coined years and years ago, and it has to do with reactive behaviors, ways that we are reactive in typically a work environment, but it can also be in any kind of environment that causes us to perceive that our competence is less than others perceive it to be. And that can show up as feeling like a fraud. It can show up as perfectionism, rejection sensitivity, where you're sensitive, highly sensitive to criticism, judgment, or feedback even. It can show up as a lack of confidence. It can show up as depressed entitlement, where consciously or unconsciously, you don't really feel entitled to the same things that others are entitled to. So, as an example, I was the only female software engineer right out of college, and I didn't think I had the right to ask questions and ask for help, because I thought that I had to overperform because I was a woman to prove myself. And if I had showed any sign of weakness, which was, something that the men around me were perfectly comfortable doing, that wasn't acceptable. So that's sort of the set of 5 behaviors. We call them our fingerprint. And your listeners can go on composurethebook.com. There's a free assessment where you can actually fill out 20 questions that takes 3 minutes and get an email back with ranking the imposter behaviors and which ones are most acute for you. There's also a pretty clear description of each in that. So those are the imposter behaviors. Now, what we know is when we're able to move through those, and we'll talk about how we do that, and have them recede. So you're not so sensitive to that criticism or judgment or rejection. You're not so prone to perfectionism. You're, feeling more comfortable and confident. Then a number of ways that you show up can shift. You can show up with much more presence. We call that executive presence, because you get to show up with more confidence and more curiosity. You can be clearer in your communication because you can be more direct, and because you're less worried about what other people think. You create greater connection with people because you typically tend to show up more authentically, and you have this grace under pressure. You are able to remain composed and calm and grounded, even in situations that maybe previously would have triggered you. And a fundamental premise of the book is that we can't change our environment. Like, even in the most progressive work environments, there are pockets of microaggressions and biases, and we can't guarantee that your boss is going to be particularly adept at navigating the world in a way that feels comfortable to you, or that you won't find yourself in certain situations that trigger you. So the idea is to find this composure within yourself so that you can be more resourceful and react with more resilience when you're faced with those situations.
Great. And we'll get back to that internal versus external in a bit. One of the concepts that you've really built into this process is the idea of trauma, various types of trauma. And can you chat with our audience a little bit about what effect trauma really has on how we act today, how we show up today, really core of this concept of imposter syndrome and or composure?
Absolutely. So trauma is something, and it could be a capital T, like losing a parent, or having a really traumatic event in childhood. It could be a little t, like having a learning difference and being bullied. So those trauma, I just want to broaden the concept, but basically trauma is something that sits in our body, and the purpose of it is to protect us from future harm. So whenever a situation or dynamic appears to be threatening, our body reacts with emotion, and our brain shuts down, and we go into fight or flight. So that's really what I call being triggered or being reactive. Something happens that creates this dynamic in which you basically lose your composure. You lose your ability to remain calm and present. You get ready to run out the door and leave the room. And I'll just give you a quick example. So one of my clients grew up in a family that put a tremendous amount of pressure on her academically and for performance reasons. And, in many ways, it made her wildly successful. She became a very senior leader at Amazon, the AWS, the web services. And that is a very competitive, high pressure environment. So one day she was presenting to her team to the executives their 12-month plan for the following year. And she and her team had worked really hard on this and really pushed themselves to think out of the box and to really expand their vision of what could create a big impact in the business. And she had done everything right, done all the groundwork for it. She had, previewed it with several executives to gain support in the meeting. The only one that she hadn't previewed it with was the most senior executive in the meeting. And what happened is she gave this great presentation and she got a lot of great questions. And then the most senior executive in the meeting spoke up and said, wow, this is great, except I don't think you're thinking big enough. And that just came flying in and caused her to just freeze and actually shut down. She took it as a criticism and a sign that she had failed in her presentation. And she basically pretty much ended the meeting quickly and left the room without really understanding what he meant by that comment. So that's the kind of thing that can happen when you have trauma around being perfect or being exceptional, which many gifted people, we work with a lot of people who were gifted as young children who came to believe in their systems that in order to be loved and accepted, they had to be perfect or exceptional. So this idea of that she had faltered at all was really traumatic for her. And it was made worse by a challenging work environment.
It's so interesting when you talk through that exercise or any 100 exercises like that. when you hear it, it seems so logical what emotion shouldn't have happened there, right? But I myself, and I'm sure many people listening can think of an exact moment or 10 where that's happened. I can immediately, where you think back and you said that was actually a very positive statement.
Yes.
And somehow you just collapse. That's really, really interesting.
And let me just,
I know as,
oh, sorry.
yeah.
I was just going to
No,
offer
go ahead, Kate.
the alternative to that, right? So the question is, how might she have preferred to react? And when I worked with her, I coached her for several months, and I worked with her, and we went back to that situation. I had her load up everything that the problem was she was so vulnerable to external feedback that she failed to take into account really what she knew to be true, which is when I asked her about what she knew to be true going into that presentation, she knew that she and her team had done an exceptional job and really pushed themselves to think big. She knew that they have its powerful intention to create tremendous value for the business. She knew that she was deserving of and entitled to having her ideas heard and debated in a respectful manner, which was what was happening. So she knew all of that was true. And yet at the moment that came in, she forgot all that. It was like that all went out the window. And what she could have done, and this is what we taught her to do later, is to step back from that and go, wow, I just got triggered. Okay, hold on a sec. Let me regain my footing. I'm going to count backwards from 3 to 1. I'm going to breathe. I'm going to find my butt in the seat. And I'm going to ask a question to get clarity, because I'm pretty sure that my overreaction, maybe I'm not getting, I don't really understand what's happening. And the question she could have asked was something like, Joe, that's so interesting. My team and I worked so hard to push ourselves to think out of the box and think as big as we could. I'm really curious where you see opportunities to think bigger. Right? And that's actually what Joe wanted. Yeah. That would have been in the highest and best good for everybody. It certainly would have given her a lot of learning, and it might have gotten her more budget, more resources, more opportunity in the business.
Yeah. So Kate, this sounds great, but going back to that trigger scenario, because it's just that super quick and then something happens, how can one start quickly recognizing what is happening to them and then move into a state of being composed and productive?
Yeah, so this is really the process that we take you through in the book or any of the programs that we run. We run a 12-week intensive course. And so the idea is there's 3 steps to it. The first step is awareness. So once you take the assessment and you understand what you're likely to be sensitive to. A lot of people haven't ever put words to their sensitivity. Oh, this is rejection sensitivity, or oh, this is where I'm feeling like a fraud and I don't feel like I'm going to have the answer, or whatever that is. So once you take inventory of the ways you're likely to get triggered, you can be on the lookout for them. You can notice, and when you also become aware of what happens in your body when that happens, you can start to notice that and get a little distance from it. And so then what usually happens is after we do some of the work in the program, the next time we meet with people, they say, oh, I was in a meeting the other day and so said something and I was about to react to it, but I caught myself. And then you can do the second phase. So first phase is awareness. Second phase is resolution, which is, breathe, use these tools, breathe, find your butt in the chair, count backwards from 3 to 1, and think of a question to ask rather than a response to give. And so that's the second thing, is how do I resolve this? And then over time, you become less and less sensitive because of this awareness. And then finally, the final is transformation, in which you get to a place where you're really comfortable being challenged or asking questions you don't know the answer to, because the triggers associated with that have been diminished. And that takes time, but 80% of the process of becoming less reactive is simply to gain awareness. And that's the good news, because that's the easiest part.
Great. Fantastic. That's a good play into this idea of, you do present these as literally sort of brain hacks, and how can you have almost a set of tools to work with as you are getting these external influxes and situations, which we'll get back to. And also, Avi, I do see your question, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. So let's go into I'd love to hit a couple of other, I don't want to give away the book, but a couple of the other exercises that you do offer in the book.
Yeah.
One of them, which is a nice short-term tactic to use, and I was saying to you as we were prepping, I actually shared this with a group of women that I know just yesterday, because somebody in the group really seemed to have like the perfect situation for this. But intention setting. So what is it? What is it for? What does it allow us to do? Can you quickly go through the idea of intention setting?
Yes. So what we start with in the book, in the sort of middle phase, which is the moving through awareness through resolution, is we start with powerful intentions. If you think about it, the kind of ridiculous example we use is, if you jump in a cab and the cab driver says, "Where do you want to go?" And you go, "I don't want to go to the airport." It's like, wait, but where do you want to go? So many of us approach things in our life like, I don't want something. I don't want to be reactive in meetings, or I don't want to stress out before a big presentation. Okay, that's really great, but that's a negative. It's an away from intention. It's something you want to avoid. A much more powerful intention is what's called a toward intention, and that is an intention where you want to have a different experience. And then once you identify that experience, you can actually begin to jump into that experience and start to learn about how to get there, right? So rather than saying, I don't want to stress out before I give a presentation, you could say, I'd like to be free to leave my presentation behind at 6:00 the night before I give it, wake up in the morning, do some yoga, have breakfast, walk in without prepping, take 5 seconds to center myself and establish my boundaries, and show up in a way of feeling more confident, right? And that's a different experience. And so how you get there is the work we do with brain hacks. What we do is we have you imagine a clone of yourself that can do that with no problem at all. The clone of you doesn't even ever think about getting nervous when she's about to give a presentation. It would never dawn on her to stay up late rehearsing, to wake up first thing in the morning, rehearse some more, and to enter the room sort of on edge. That doesn't even enter her mind. And so we start to get curious about how she does that. What happens when what happens the day before for her? How did she prep? And how does she wake up in the morning? What does she do in the morning before she goes to the office? And once you start to do that, you start to get some clues as to the things that she might believe to be true. The way she views things, like if she doesn't have the answer to a question, it's not the end of the world. I'll say, you know what, that's a great question. And I'll get back to you on that by noon tomorrow. So just allows you to start to get curious about what someone exactly like you, except for this little brain hack we do where we remove that fear about the presentation. What's her life like, and how's it different?
Love that. We do have a little follow-up question, which is a good one, I think, to clarify with your Amazon anecdote that you gave. Yeah. Courtney is wondering, in the case where a senior executive or whomever it may be in the workplace comment is actually over the line and inappropriate, and you can probably actually use this question also in terms of like a microaggression. Yes. What should be the composed approach of an executive? And she follows it up by trying to make the distinction between going high and moving forward versus like literally not being a doormat.
Yeah, we get that a lot, and it's a really interesting one. I think so. There's this. I think it's I think it's Einstein who said, "Never attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence." So I'm just going to use that as a construct, right? I think that look, if somebody is being aggressive, if they're exhibiting microaggressions, and you don't want to be a doormat. You also need to be aware of what you come into the room triggered by, because that's where that line gets really tricky. So I just was on a call this morning with this very senior executive woman on board who is sensitive to bullying. She's absolutely gets furious with bullies. So she was in a board meeting where one of the male board members made a bullying comment to her, and she got really angry and she reacted to it. And it was very interesting because I did the brain hack exercise with her, and I asked her the question, what response would you like instead? And she's like, well, I'm not really sure. And I said, well, if we took away the part of you that was triggered by a bully, right? And like a bullies didn't bother you, whatever, knock yourself out. And how would you react then? And she took a look at that reaction and thought, I'd probably respond really calmly and go, whoa, where did that come from? And I said, well, how would you feel about that response? And she's like, you know what? I wouldn't feel okay about that. That's not what I want. I think sometimes you have to come back and you have to hit back a little bit. So I think it's a personal decision, but I will say one thing. How and what questions are the most powerful way to deal with any contentious situation? Because when somebody comes at you with something, you can always ask them to rephrase or restate the question. And you could say, what I'm hearing is this. I just want to clarify. Is that what you're saying to me? Can you please clarify what you meant to convey? And that forces an aggressive question to either remain aggressive or to back down. And then you can choose how you deal with that, right? Do you just ignore the aggressiveness because you just, the emperor has no clothes now? You've just revealed that. And then just deal with the question, or do you actually push back on that? And it's up to you. I mean, I think that's a really personal thing.
Yeah, one of the things that just popped into my head is the act of asking a question in this particular instance basically demands accountability. Then you have actually placed the other person in a situation. They've got to actually respond to their own actions.
Yes.
So that's and you in your other instances too, which may not be this in this particular case, that idea of asking questions is very interesting. Pause, reframe, and ask a question, and that's very interesting.
And you do one quick thing on that. There's a way to ask a question that's kind of snarky. This is not what I'm talking about. It's asking a question really in the spirit of curiosity. It's hard to judgment and curiosity cannot coexist. When you get triggered, you're usually judging what the other person said. If you can shift into curiosity, then you can ask a question from the place of curiosity that has the potential to deepen understanding and or clarify dynamics, right? And so that's really what I mean.
Yep. And it sounds like as you're talking through this, asking a question from a point of curiosity is not meant to undervalue what actually happened, the bullying, the inappropriate comment. And it's not meant to let anybody off the hook, but it is to get to a place where everyone understands what happened. And then there can actually be a dialogue or whatever may come from that. Is that kind of how to think about it?
That is. An example came up this morning of the other group I was working with, a very senior group of female executives who are on boards, and they talked about this passion. Women are passionate and being accused of being emotional. And so a live accusation can be lobbed in the meeting where it's like, well, hold on a second, you're getting emotional about this. And you can say something like, I am passionate about this. I'm curious how you would like me to convey my passion, or something like that. You basically call out the fact that I'm passionate about this. You take out the negative word, reframe it in terms of passion. I'm passionate about this, and this is a really important point to me. So that's where I'm coming from. How can I be more effective in conveying that? And then they're forced
Yep.
to take a complaint and actually deal with it, right?
Great. One more section we can dive into. The boundary setting. You've got a whole section on boundary setting, which has a couple of different levels to it as well. So as we're working on elevating our level of composure, why is boundary setting important? And then how should we think about it? What are a couple of ways we can go about doing so?
Yeah, so this is great. I'm going to give you a little 101 on boundary setting. So we have a chapter in the book called Badass Boundaries, and it's a module in our 12-week program as well. We have 6 modules every other week. And it's our favorite one because this is an area that transcends work, business. I mean, it's one of those things that you can always, most of the people we work with can benefit from strengthening their boundaries. And by strengthening boundaries, I don't mean putting a wall up. What I mean is creating a little bit of space so that they can keep things out. So this is literally a somatic feeling. It's a felt body experience. So the idea is that we have a personal boundary around us, and it is either too narrow or too far or just right, depending upon the situation. And I encourage you all, just do this little mini exercise with me. Put your hands up and imagine, like palms up like this. Imagine that the back of your hands represent the sacred space that is yours. And only you let in whatever you choose to let in, and you keep out anything you choose to keep out. This is the universal sign for back off, right? So this is around the world in almost every culture. This means back off. So it's really powerful to use the somatic sense of back off in asking the question, where do I end and where do others begin? Which is a powerful question to establish boundaries. Now, when you're feeling, vulnerable, your boundaries are probably here. And just the act, try this, just the act of moving, knowing this is my safe space, moving it back, my chest tightens, my throat tightens when I think of my boundaries being here. And I can see that there's nothing for me to protect me from whatever comes in. Whatever happens, I'm going to internalize it and immediately react to it. When I push my boundaries out here, too far out, suddenly I'm kind of walling myself off from the world. And that's a little bit too far. I want to be a little more accessible than that. So you can actually think about, which most of us have never done, this somatic sense. And this spans all the way around you. So what's a comfortable boundary? Most of our clients, before they go into a challenging meeting or anything with conflict or where they have to really perform, they do this exercise before they walk in. They put their boundary in place, they establish it, they take a few breaths, and they remind themselves what they know to be true, just like the Amazon executive, that I've prepared, I'm a subject matter expert, my intentions are very powerful with regard to the outcomes here, I'm open-minded, I'm human, it's okay if I don't know every answer, you just sort of remind yourself, and that allows whatever comes in to have to big filter through all of that goodness rather than just being reactive.
Great. And you're getting some great feedback on, I think some people were pushing and pulling on that one. So that's really good.
So strange. Like, and you can ask yourself, you know what? Oh, here's a great quick exercise. Think of a difficult situation, like a conflict or something, a performance review. That's usually a pretty charged situation. And just think of that and then think of, okay, where are my boundaries in that? Whoa. And you realize when they're here, you're like, whoa, I have to definitely create more space and fill this up so I can walk in with more composure.
Yeah. And that's actually a perfect segue because the next item I did want to hit. So we have been talking about being motivated from inside. We've been talking about brain hacks to show up, but guess what doesn't change? All the shit around us. And so when we are talking about the reality of being in situations where there are triggers, there are people who are degrading, conflict. So after we've done this work on our executive presence and we are in the reality of conflict, talk to us about conflict and how to deal with it.
Yeah, this is a great one. We have a chapter in the book that focuses a lot on inner conflict, but the inner conflict is you deal with conflict the same, whether it's inner or outer. So conflict involves actually conflict typically involves two sides, right? There's when it's inner conflict, it's like, I want to work out every day. On the one hand, I want to work out every day. On the other hand, oh my gosh, I was awake with my baby all night and I'm super tired. Or I've had an exhausting day at work and I just don't have the energy, but I really want to work out every day. There's this internal conflict. This part of you that just wants to hunker down and self-care and drink tea and read a book, and the other part that wants to work out. So that's really what conflict involves. It involves two sides to some issue, right? So one powerful way to deal with conflict is and this is particularly in the context of giving feedback where you may not agree. I'll give you a great example. We have a woman in Italy who works for a very, very large insurance company. And she was on this project that it's in the audit division, which is high risk. You have to do it right. There's no cutting corners. However, there was a pretty tight deadline. So she was working with a counterpart in the business who was pushing really hard for her and her team to deliver against this deadline. And it really wasn't realistic given the fiduciary duty they had to do it really well. And this was the conflict. No, you've got to meet this deadline. Well, we'd love to meet the deadline, but we don't have time to do it. And so finally she stepped back and she said, Joe, I understand how important this is to the business. And I recognize and I really appreciate your diligence in wanting to drive this and make it be delivered on time. I understand that. On the other hand, I'm having real difficulty reconciling the reality of having to meet this fiduciary bar within that time frame because I don't see how it could happen. So I'd love to explore ways with you that we might be able to address this in a way that we're more responsive to schedule, and yet we're still able to do that. Are you willing to work with me on this, right? And that's such a reasonable request that most people say yes. And in fact, one element of that you notice is an appreciation. You actually have to issue a genuine appreciation for the person you're in conflict with for their positive intention. There's always a positive intention sitting behind conflict. And if you acknowledge that positive intention and that it's in conflict with your positive intention, then you've got something to talk about.
Great. That is fantastic. Another great little tactic for everybody. We've got a little over 15 minutes. I want to, there was a question back from Avi in the chat. It's a good question for right about now. She was wondering, are there different types of executive presence and or composure style archetypes that women tend to employ? Or is that based on those 5 breakdowns or?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'm going to just say that what I view imposter behaviors and executive presence as sort of 2 ends of the spectrum in how reactive or resilient and grounded and calm you are, right? They sort of live at ends of the spectrum. What I believe is that when we're able to really tame our reactivity, when we're able to maintain our composure and grace under pressure, regardless of what happens, there are 2 things that occur in terms of how we show up. One is that we can keep 100% of our brain focused on the present. We're not spinning about what's he going to say, or should I say this or not, or whatever that is. You can actually simply be really present, right? The second thing is you can be authentic, because you can actually say the things that are authentic to you. You can show up in a way that's authentic to you without regard for what other people think. It's this idea of letting other people have their feelings. And you can set things up to ease that. So I joined a board of a financial services company. It's in an insurance industry, which is a complex industry I know very little about. I'm the only woman on the board. I don't know anything about the brokerage side of this business that this company is involved in. And I'm at my first board meeting, and one of the challenges in that environment is not knowing how to show up, right? So this idea, I think it gets a little bit to the archetype. How do I show up with presence when I'm the new kid on the block? I know nothing. I don't know the industry. And so, one of the authentic ways to do that is actually say what's in my head when I want to ask a question or make a point, which is, I don't know. I know I'm new to the insurance industry and I'm new to this business. But I do have background in this area, so I'd like to contribute this and from that perspective, here's what I see. Is that relevant? And so it's allowing me to actually say what I'm thinking, right? Another example of this is the woman who was accused of being too emotional or too passionate. I'm sort of like, well, A, do you care and want to do anything about that? Is it harming your progress, or should you just allow them to have that experience? And one way to deal with that is to say, she's a lawyer. And so she says, look, I could be drab and boring, but then I couldn't really engage people like I like to. So part of the way I engage them in drab, boring legal stuff is to get passionate and animated about it. So, she can show up and announce that she's passionate and she's animated, she's passionate about this. That law is boring, but she finds it exciting, and actually she really cares about this particular issue. So I might be more. I'm really passionate about this, but I'm doing so in service of trying to really engage you in a rich way. She can preamble that so that others can decide how they feel about it.
Yeah.
And own it, right? Own it.
Yeah, and Kate, I've got a question on the first anecdote that you used, in the boardroom, and expressing what could come across as a limitation, right? And then being honest about it. How far does one go with that openness and matter-of-factness? Because I say that because I have been in situations I'm remembering specifically a workshop I was in, and the instructor was wonderful, knew her stuff, but she was really answering questions in a way that says, I would really love your feedback. I'm also learning, and that type of thing. And it felt like it was taken away from her presence. So how can we think about that?
So I'm not talking about being self-deprecating in any way, and I'm talking about owning it, right? So part of it is to own the confidence. It is completely apparent to everybody, and we've had conversations that I'm no expert in insurance and that I'm going to need to come up to speed. So I was simply stating the obvious in a way that allowed me to make a contribution and contextualize the contribution. Because I wasn't saying it from this perspective of being an expert here. I was saying I'm contextualizing it as coming from another industry, another perspective, in the event that it's valuable. So, my feeling is when you're leading, you kind of have to own your stuff, and you have to know that part of it is gaining the confidence and clarity that you are a subject matter expert, and there's no apology for that. But you are also human, and you don't know everything. So there's some level of confidence, and I think is the right combo.
Yeah. As you're talking through that, I think that clarity, which then leads to confidence, is that hit the nail on the head, I think. So thank you for working through that with me.
If you're going to put text around it, then that helps.
Yeah. And context. Yes. Great. And By the way, if anybody has any questions, please put them again in chat or the ask a question box. I want to jump a little bit down or into your book a little bit. Slight shift, but not too much. Can you talk to us about the joy factor?
Yes, the joy factor. You know, I'm going to talk about it in the context of burnout, actually, because we're all experiencing, I think, an unprecedented level of burnout. And I just did a brain hack. By the way, we have brain hacks, brain hack podcasts and brain hack videos on composurethebook.com, our website, /podcast. I just did one. It was the first in a series with our head of marketing, Drew. And his big issue was that he wants more time for his creative self. And he, between his home duties and his work, he was having a really hard time finding time for his creative self. And so really what this relates to is how you, wait, I'm sorry, I've just lost my train of thought. Can you repeat that question?
The joy factor.
Thank you. Yeah, so what we were talking about was that what this creative side brings him joy, tremendous joy. And when you're burned out and when you are feeling buried and having your tank depleted, it's the most high octane way you can fill your tank. And there's this fallacy that we think if we indulge ourselves, like his idea was, if I could do joy first, if I could do my creative stuff first, then I'd have more energy, you know, then I'd get it done, and I would have served myself. And his original thought was, but then that would be it would be a zero-sum game. It would mean sacrificing something else. But as we did this brain hack, he realized, oh no, it's an energizing thing. It will give me more energy, so I'm more present and available to do this other stuff. And that's what joy does. And if you can do an assessment, we have a whole assessment of where you break down your day into buckets of things you do. And we have this joy scale that lists all of these emotions, and you figure out each bucket, where does it land? And then you look for ways to try to either up level the bucket of tasks or eliminate them entirely. Because if you can start to operate more and more in joy, you're simply more powerful. Things happen, magic occurs in ways that it doesn't if you're toiling down in obligation and duty.
Great. That's fantastic. That's perfect. And we have one other good question from Avi too. Beyond taming reactivity, are there proactive elements to executive presence and composure? I will just say that the book is full of them, but Kate, I'd love for you to answer that question if there are some top or some specifics.
That's such a great question. Thank you. You cannot show executive presence without communication. And one of the things we talk a lot about in our 12-week program, as you know, Kate, is that managing up and communicating up is one of the most important ways to show up with presence. And what that means is we have a simple formula for it. And if you start to do this every week, I guarantee you your social capital in the business will go up. The first thing is breakthroughs. 3 breakthroughs from your team this week. And they can be a big B or a little b. Like a breakthrough can be, you know, we had a supply chain issue ordering this part. We had to find a second supplier. We were concerned it would take us weeks, but we were able to secure that supplier today. So now we can keep our schedule on track rather than having to slip it. That's a breakthrough. So you list 3 of those. You list 3 risks to the business and how you're mitigating them. And you list up to 3 requests that you have. And if you do this every week and you give it to your boss and or any of the stakeholders who, especially if you're on a project where you have other executive stakeholders, it's a great way to keep them informed about whether you're on track and what's up in the project. It also allows the CEO to walk into a board meeting and say, you know, I'm happy to announce that we're on track for this project. The team had hit a big roadblock with a supplier issue, but they were able to resolve it really rapidly so that it hasn't impacted the schedule and we're still on track. That is a powerful statement for the CEO to make about his team and about the business, or her team and the business. And that is what we're talking about with this communication.
Great. That's an excellent strategy to use, or tool, should I say. MC has a good question. Does executive presence look the same for a woman in her early 30s as it does for a senior female business leader?
That's such a great question. I guess what I would say is, obviously the more senior you are, the more gravitas you carry in the business, and the more subject matter expertise you have, right? But the main thing about executive presence is it's really about the energy you show up with. It's showing up, being present, and being yourself, and being non-reactive, and being curious. It's really about that. It's 90% of people's perception of you, or 70% is your energy. It's not what you say, it's how they perceive you to be present. You've all had that experience of somebody walking in a room before anybody's opened their mouth, and they walk in the room and you go, whoa, who's that? And they're not necessarily the most senior person in the room. They just carry with them this presence and gravitas. And people notice that. So that's really what we're talking about. It's an internal sense of presence that's very powerful.
That's great. In the last couple of minutes, that's actually a really good segue. Just this morning, and I'm going to post it for folks on NPR, they had a clip on imposter syndrome. And I have one question that I actually thought of from that clip. But one of the women they had interviewed was a psychologist, I believe in her, early 60s. And she actually said the thing that really changes is as you move forward and you move up and you move into more positions of gravitas. She literally positioned it as, you begin to care less.
Yes.
Which is almost, it could almost be translated into using these brain hacks and letting things roll off your back, and being secure and practiced in that art of composure is almost kind of what she was a little bit getting at. And I'll post that link. It was a short, I just put it there in the chat.
It's so true. And I just want to say that my big goal with this book is to accelerate that, because I didn't get there until I'm almost 60. I didn't get there until my early 50s. I've only been living in that space for less than a decade, and I've had a 4-decade career. So, that is something that's my hope, is that this book will help people get to that point where it's not that you care, but that you're able to stay solid within yourself and let other people have their feelings and not have to manage or control or people, and just really be able to be and to be realistic that, what, if this is an environment where I'm not able to show up and be myself and contribute in the way that's authentic to me, then maybe I have to look and ask the question, is this the right environment for me?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good, a good thought process too, is once you have gotten into a position of composure and executive presence, and the external factors are really just not going to be conducive really for any professional, right? Just, plain and simple, that's a real at that point reassessment of the external. So Kate, I'd love to end, because again, on this interview this morning, the question was asked, and I think it's a good one. The question was asked of, does imposter syndrome, do you get cured? Does it go away? Are we just living in a series of brain hacks? I'd love to hear your answer on that.
Well, the work I do is built on something called Neuro-Linguistic programming, and that is really designed to make fundamental changes at a very core level. If you think of a tree and roots, like if you make changes on the branches, that might change the leaves. But if you start to make changes in the trunk or in the root, it transforms things across the board. And that is what the work that we do and the work in the book is designed to do. And it's a process of layering. It's like peeling back the onion, because what happens is you work on this one thing and suddenly it goes away, and you notice 3 months later, wow, I haven't been reactive about not knowing the answer to questions in meetings. Oh my gosh, it's so great. but then you've discovered something else that is the next thing that you're dealing with. So it is a constant process of dealing with things, but I will tell you that it gets to the point where you get to a point of not really caring so much, letting stuff roll off your back, seeing things going, oh, I'm reactive to that. Isn't that interesting? And that just becomes the norm. And it makes you feel much more in control of your life. So I can guarantee that's possible to make tremendous shifts.
Great. Love it.
So
Kate, thank you so much. Definitely.
$4.99. Yeah. It's on 50% off right now for this group on Amazon.
Oh my God, go people.
$4.99. Want to go buy it? Composure, the Art of Executive Presence. My last name will pull it up, and that's for through I think Friday or Saturday.
Okay. Okay, that's great. Do you want to? Are you able to actually type that in the chat, or it doesn't matter? I want to make sure people get that.
Yeah, on Amazon, Composure, the Art of Executive Presence. If you click on the Composure book link, it'll probably take you to the website. Just go to Amazon, Kindle version, $4.99.
Okay. Okay. Amazon Kindle version. Fantastic. Great. You've got a couple people who already have the book, which is a great news. And if you don't have the book, go get it. And I think also, Kate, that you mentioned there is a workbook associated with it, which is very deep in terms of exercises and work, and would definitely recommend that as well.
It's free. The electronic version is free, and there's also a printed version you can purchase, but the electronic version is free, and you can take yourself through the process using these same exercises that we use in the group work that we do.
Yep, and I've used some of them because I've worked with Kate before, and they're great. So, Kate, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Love spending this time with you, and hope it sounds like it was valuable, and I hope it was valuable for everybody. And I think we are also going to see you in 2022 for some stuff too, which is great.
Yes, we'll do more together. And Kate, thank you for all that you do for this community of women. It's so important, and I'm just a huge fan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everybody.